Hello everyone, Sableye here and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be going over some of the more underexplored Pokemon in Regulation D right now, and I know it's still super early in the meta, but I do think some of these Pokemon should be finding their way into the metagame sooner rather than later, because some of them are probably really good right now and just a little underexplored and not really used as much as I think they should be. And we're just going to jump straight into things right now with Mimikyu. And Mimikyu, I think I say this every time every time I make one of these like underused in this format tier lists, because in theory, it's a very good Pokemon, right? Its ability is absolutely phenomenal. And especially in a format where Pokemon damage trades are going to be a thing, right? Urshifu is doing ridiculous amounts of damage to you. You get the chance to force the surging strikes into you, and you're still not dying because you can very easily live a couple surging strikes. You don't need to calc for all three. You just need to make sure two are doing less than 88% because you lose 12% when the first one breaks your disguise. However, in theory, you also pressure it back, and I think that's what I like about Mimikyu. Is yeah, a lot of things can live Urshifu, right? You can build to live an Urshifu attack, but not a lot of things can actually pressure it in return. Now, you're probably not getting a one-shot in return with a Play Rough, but what you can be doing is pressuring a Will-O-Wisp. Right now, yeah, you might want to pressure Play Rough and have massive damage potential into it. It's going to still do like 70%, right? But more importantly, you're going to be living the attack. You're going to be pressuring Will-O-Wisp. And what this does is not only does it make them scared of Mimikyu, it more often than not forces Mimikyu to get doubled into. Now, this gives you room to either protect or redirect with another slot, or at the very least, set something up in your other slot. Because if they're scared of Mimikyu, they have to be scared of something else. And I used this concept in Series 2 on my Vancouver team where I got second place. I used Corviknight as more of it's a mon that they have to worry about. But if they worry about it, chances are they're picking the wrong target, because what I have beside it is going to be doing more to them than the Corviknight would immediately. Now, the same thing applies for Mimikyu, right? If you're dealing with my Mimikyu, right, maybe beside my Mimikyu, I have something like a big powerhouse, maybe something like an Ursaluna, maybe something along the lines of a Glacier, some sort of powerhouse, maybe an Urshifu of my own that's just going to be like threatening massive damage onto you if you're stuck dealing with my Mimikyu, right? Long story short, there's a lot of things you can do beside Mimikyu, and that Mimikyu allows you to enable. Now, normally I would say you don't want to run Trick Room. Really, if you're going to run Trick Room, you're probably going to be running Crest in this format, or the hardcore like Indeedee stuff, just because Psychic Terrain is very good. But I think Mimikyu has that niche in this format where it's one of these small things and one of the few things that might actually be justified outside of those two to set Trick Room, right? The disguise ability, like I said before, forces a lot of double ups. If you want to stop Trick Room, more often than not, you're doubling into this thing. You kind of have no choice, right? And if you need to double into a Pokemon, as I said before, I don't necessarily need to have Follow Me beside this Mimikyu to set up Trick Room. And I mean, I could throw an Amoonguss here, right? Like Mimikyu, Amoonguss, hard Trick Room core kind of thing. I could see it, not a necessity though. Like I said, something big, some sort of powerhouse, while the Mimikyu's there. Because I could have a powerhouse and I could have Mimikyu. Let's just say I have Urshifu Dark, just for quick method of example, right? And I lead Mimikyu Urshifu, right? You don't want Trick Room up because I have an Ursaluna in the back. Let's just say, right? You don't want Trick Room up, I have Ursaluna in the back, so you kind of have to double Mimikyu. Right? So now you double Mimikyu, maybe I have a Choice Banded Urshifu, or like I don't even need Choice Band. Wicked Blow is doing ridiculous amounts of damage regardless. Or a Close Combat, right? Like the coverage from Fighting and Dark are hitting a lot of things. The only thing it really doesn't hit is Fairy. But that's besides the point. You could technically attack a Poison Jab if it still gets it, and I believe it does. It does indeed, right? So if you really wanted to, you could do that as well and kind of threaten everything, which is why I think the Water one is a little bit better, because Water and Fighting cover a little bit more than Dark and Fighting. But for the example we're here, right? Now, if you take my Mimikyu, you've given Urshifu one Wicked Blow, and then chances are you didn't kill the Urshifu, and I'm going to just come back in and either I'm going to have killed a slot because you were a frail piece, or you were a bulky piece, and I'll just outspeed again and get another Wicked Blow off, right? And because you killed Mimikyu, Urshifu now gets 2 Wicked Blows off. Now, obviously, it's not an exact science. Or you take the Urshifu, because my team gets run over by Urshifu. I've got to kill that thing. But now you've given me Trick Room. Urshifu just got killed, and now I have 4 turns in Trick Room with an Ursaluna, right? You can force these scenarios. Now, I haven't sat here and thought, like, what's the best way to run these things? Like, what's the best core way to force things with Mimikyu yet? But I do think there's potential for things like this to work. Now, something else I do want to point out is that Dragonite and Shenpao are still a very valid core, right? And Mimikyu does a very, very strong job into that core as well. If they lead Mimikyu, so if they lead like Dragonite, Shenpao, you pressure with a Play Rough, you pressure with Will-O-Wisp, you pressure with the Shadow Sneak after the Play Rough drops down the Shenpao to Sash, right? You pressure with Trick Room since they're trying to go fast. Anyways, you have a lot of options with Mimikyu, and I think that's where Mimikyu might slot in as opposed to Cresselia, because Cresselia is a really bulky mon, but it doesn't apply pressure immediately. And I think that's where Mimikyu has that potential, right? Like, I can kind of ignore Cresselia as long as I know that there's no Calm Mind, or that I know that I have something in the back that can kill it. Mimikyu, if you try to do that, the burns are going to start adding up. The Play Rough damage is going to start adding up. You can get really aggressive if you wanted to toss a Life Orb onto it. I don't think you need to. But I do think there's more potential with Mimikyu than people are using right now, or looking into right now. I just think it's a really strong option. The Ghost typing is really, really nice. But more importantly, the Disguise forces the double ups into things. I just talked for 6 minutes on Mimikyu. I don't know why, but let's move on. Okay, we're back with Kanto Moltres as our second underexplored pick. And y'all were hating on me on my tier list where I put this thing in A tier. So, you know, I'm going to put my money where my mouth is. We're going to talk about Moltres a little bit here. I really do think it has a spot. Maybe A tier was a bit of a stretch, guys. I'll admit, I'll be honest. But I do think y'all are sleeping on this thing. It has really, really good stats. Like, just straight up, the stats are amazing. Right, the distribution is very, very even. It's really bulky, like 90, 90, 85 is solid. Speed at base 90 is nothing to laugh at either. And special attack of 125, you're doing damage, right? And what I think is most important is Flame Body. And what I want to say Moltres is the best at in this format, or what makes Moltres the best, is the fact that I can tear it out of being a Fire Flying type. Moltres was a subpar Pokemon as a Fire Flying type. But as a different type, I think it could potentially be amazing. My first instincts were Water. There's a lot of options. There's a lot of room to play with this. If you want to keep your Fairy resistance, which is something important, especially with all the Flutter Mains going around, you could opt for Poison. I don't like Steel because then you're getting close combated by the Urshifus. But basically Water, you're not getting hit by the Surging Strikes. And it's similar to Zapdos, right? Where if you Surging Strikes into it 3 hits on a 30% chance, chances are that Urshifu is going to get burned. And if I Terra Water, they don't want to hit me, right? I'm basically saying don't hit me, but you need to hit me. Now, I know a lot of these things and a lot of my list today is going to be basically countering Urshifu in a way, shape, or form. It's not necessarily the case. It's more so the case that Urshifu is one of the big meta threats, and having a Pokemon being able to deal with that is just really, really nice. Now, I'm not saying it's like, oh my goodness, Moltres-Kanto was the best Urshifu answer. But I do think being able to tear it out of the water weakness and forcing it to hit you. Because it wants to hit you, because you're going to kill it back with something like an Air Slash or a Hurricane, right? You scared it. Maybe you go physical. You do have base 100 attack. It's not good, guys. Don't do it. But, you know, if you wanted to pressure something, maybe you could. But I do think something like Air Slash, Heat Wave, it's a really good, 2 really strong offensive stabs that you can now get a defensive Terra for. I think it's a really good Pokemon. I think people are sleeping, right? You also have cool Helping Hand, like cool tech moves, right? You just get Helping Hand if you wanted to. You get Roost as well just to start healing things. If you're really that terrified of Amoonguss, you get Safeguard, right? I probably wouldn't recommend that, but you do get these options, right? And these cool moves are, I think, what sets it apart, right? You could just run Will-O-Wisp if you wanted to too, right? Like, hey, if you're not going to hit me, I'm still going to burn you, you know? Like, you can kind of force pins with this. Air Slash puts on a lot of pressure. You make them want to hit you. And then all of a sudden, they can no longer hit you. Grass is also a cool option if you don't want to be weak to electric types, right? Like, you have options with this thing. You get support like Tailwind as well. There's just so many options. Like, I haven't even made it off the usable moves list yet. And like, generally speaking, there's some hidden gems into useless moves too, right? Like, I'm not going to say Hyper Beam is good, but maybe you want to set Rain Dance, which is kind of cool as well. Sunny Day, right? Maybe to counter the rain that's going around right now, right? Like, you've got cool moves on this Moltres. You've got the stats to back it up. It definitely has potential to be a threat in this metagame, especially, like, if Urshifu Amoonguss is a threat, this just beats both, right? Maybe you go safety goggles, say, I don't even care about Amoonguss anymore. I can just click my good old-fashioned air slash into your Urshifus, get some damage up, ignore your Amoonguss entirely, and then whenever I feel the need to kill the Amoonguss, I'll take the Amoonguss, right? Maybe I'll force you to make a switch. And remember, guys, this is what I like about doubles is you have two Pokemon, and it's similar to the Mimikyu where I was like, hey, Mimikyu's here, guys. You have to deal with it. So otherwise my other Pokemon's going to do things. This is a little different, right? It's like you want to ignore this thing because you don't think it's good. Like, I don't know. If I ever saw a Moltres, I'd be like, it's not doing anything. It's a Moltres, but it's actually good. That's the thing. So you're going to ignore it because you don't want to get burned. You're going to ignore it because you don't think it's going to do damage. And then all of a sudden it just starts doing damage. And it starts putting a lot of pressure onto your Pokemon that you have on the field, right? And if you're making Urshifu and Amoonguss not want to be on the field, right? That is two key meta Pokemon that are not on the field versus whatever you want to put beside it. And I think that's what doesn't get talked about enough when it comes to team building and unique picks is a lot of the times it's what does this one Pokemon do? And people think like this. I think like this too sometimes. It's an easy trap to fall into. I want to bring Moltres, but it's like I have to Terra it so that Urshifu doesn't kill me, right? Which is great and all. It sucks, and I get that. But you have to remember that having just this Moltres, Urshifu doesn't want to touch me. And I have a whole other Pokemon that's going to be on the field beside this thing. Now, granted, using a Pokemon and using a Terra strictly for saying that I'm opening up slots for another isn't the best, right? Like, unless it's like an amazing follow me user or a friend guard support or something along those lines. But keep in mind, if you're ignoring this thing, it's actually still doing damage, right? So my Corviknight strategy from Series 2 is like Corviknight didn't do a lot of damage, but it forced some pressure because you didn't want to really get you didn't want me to match my Tailwinds and stuff like that. Here I could run the same thing, right? Maybe I do have a Tailwind, right? You don't want me to match Tailwind. So you don't want me to match Tailwind. You don't want me to burn your Urshifu. You have to hit me. And because you have to hit me, my other slots are open. And in a format where you have something like Urshifu that can be beside this thing, critting attacks that you want them to deal with, it opens the door now for the Moltres to do things, right? It just opens up hints. I think it's very, very good, especially because of the Terra. I think without the Terra, it's not amazing. It just falls to like any rock move. It's not great. But with the Terra, maybe go Terra Grass. I might have convinced myself in the back of my head that Grass is a little bit better, right? There's just options for it to be good in this meta, and I think it's super underexplored. Now, maybe we need the meta to develop a little more before like we can strictly say like, yeah, Moltres is good versus this and this core, right? And maybe that's why we haven't seen it, but I do really think it's good. I did want to just like make sure like I want to talk about Moltres because y'all were yelling at me on my tier list. Y'all like, no, Ryan, it's not good. It's good, guys, trust. It's gonna find a use. When and where, I don't exactly know, but I do think there's an opening for it, and I do think it's underexplored. Okay, now here's something that's a little bit more explored, and I still think it's not used quite as much, and I think this one really falls in the trap of, oh my goodness, it's just not Ursaluna, and the meta's not quite developed enough for it yet. This thing is good, okay? Glacier will always be a good Pokemon, right? It has ridiculous stats to back things up, right? It has a super massive attack stat, right? 145 is amazing, right? You get Killing Neigh, and that's going to boost your attack every time you take a KO. Now, the problem with this Pokemon right now is that no one really knows the reliable lines to get Trick Room set up. Because I tested Glacier on stream the other day. It went very mediocre. When I got it going, it was crazy. When I couldn't get it going, it was very, very unfortunate and not the greatest team in the world. However, if you can get this thing going, you get stuff like Ice Crash for big damage. You get stuff to beat the fire types. I believe it's Stomping Tantrum because I don't think you actually get high horsepower, despite the fact that you're a horse, which is the dumbest thing in the world. But anyways, you're a horse, you get Stomping Tantrum apparently. Anyways, you also get stuff like Close Combat if you wanted it. There's a lot of really cool moves. The one thing I'm disappointed out, and I think Game Freak was actually smart in doing this, is they took away Icicle Spear. This Pokemon used to get Icicle Spear, and you used to be, and moving forward, I was looking forward to loaded dice. I was like, yo, loaded dice, icicle spear, gonna be an absolutely crazy move, crazy set on Glacier, right? But thankfully they did take it away, probably for the best. So you do kind of have to rely on the icicle crash. But this thing can beat Ursaluna, right? You have the type advantage, you have the damage output, and you're slower than it, right? Which is really, really good. I don't think you get a clean one shot, but I also don't think they can clean one shot you if you can build bulky enough for it, because 100, 130 is really, really good defenses, right? So if they're going to go Trick Room, you can kind of play into that Trick Room with the Glacier. What the problem I find here is the lack of recovery. You take a lot of damage with Glacier. At times, like, you're not dying to really anything, right? You don't die with Glacier, right? Like, nothing is really going to take you down in one shot outside of, like, really powerhouse moves, which, generally speaking, you can normally get around and pivot around, right? But the problem is then you're taking damage, and you've taken so much damage that you have no way to really recover it. So maybe something like a Citrus Berry on this set. I know way back when Assault Vest was really popular as well, which also still valid. I just think there might be other Pokemon that want the Assault Vest more, right? So something else that I do want to point out is Swords Dance, right? If they want to bring in something like an Intimidator into you, you can just Swords Dance up. Now, Intimidate's not the most common thing, which is the main reason I haven't suggested Clear Emulate yet. But that's also an option. Like, if Intimidate becomes the problem for you, run a Clear Amulet. They can no longer cycle in and Intimidate to slow this thing down, right? And it's just reasons like this. It feels like an anti-meta Mon, which I feel like it needs to wait for the meta to develop a bit, just to figure out, like, and I'm going to say this with a lot of these picks, you need to know what you're countering when you bring these niche Pokemon in, right? And it just doesn't feel amazing right now, but I do think it's going to have a niche, and I do think it's going to have a showing at Worlds, and throughout the format in general, anything beyond Worlds as well. It's just that Worlds is like the big format for Reg D, right? So that's why I'm talking about Worlds right now. But the Mon is good. The stats are really, really good. It's going to see usage. I'm sure it probably already has. I just haven't really seen it too much. So, like, someone's going to find a way to make this thing really, really good. It does miss its partner, Tapu Fini. But, hey, maybe you set, like, Grimmsnarl with Screens and Misty Terrain instead. Right? I don't know. It's a good Mon, guys. You're going to see it. All right. From one horse to another, guys. Okay? This thing I'm a little bit more adamant in. I don't know if people have tried it. I tested it. I personally love this thing. Okay? It is very, very surprisingly good. Like, you can run something like Magoberry. I think the support sets are really, really good on Glacier, right? And you get stuff like Shadow Ball, which is probably your only main form of attack. You get Snarl. That's Sand Attack, Ryan. You get Snarl, you get Will-O-Wisp, and you get Protect. Well, not Protect, but you get Taunt as well. You can run Protect if you want, but I think Snarl is just more optimal. Snarl, Taunt, and Willow. The other three support moves are just so good. And then you can build this thing really bulky to a point where you're living Surging Strikes from Urshifus. You're living... I believe you can also tank, like, non-specs Shadow Balls from Fluttermane as well. And chances are, if they're the specs Fluttermane, you're going to be faster because the specs Fluttermanes aren't that fast, right? They tend to run slower and run bulk. So now you can Snarl it. So basically, you have a ridiculously fast Pokemon. Let's just go max speed, which hits 200. Right? I have a ridiculously fast Pokemon that is Will-O-Wisp support, so I can mitigate your attack, and Snarl support, so I can mitigate your special attack, right? And this is just a phenomenal support piece. Now, when I first built this, I was like, oh, kind of cool in the Dragonite Shenpao, right? Because you just live the Shenpao stuff, right? And you just threaten Will-O-Wisps. If the Shenpao continues to only run Sucker Punch as its Dark-type move, you live the Ice Spinner, so you don't care. And they can't Sucker Punch to kill you because you have Will-O-Wisp, so you're just going to burn the Shenpao. Then you can burn the Dragonite, right? You can burn whichever one you feel is more of a threat to your team and just pivot from there. And I did this rather successfully. I think I was hovering 1600s with the Spectre team, right? It's just a really consistent, fast support Pokemon that all of a sudden now you're not going to set Trick Room up versus it either because I have Taunt, right? And what I think makes this really nice is, ooh, I just missed a KO with a Mon beside it, right? Spectre is not picking up KOs immediately, but once you get a Grim Neigh boost for the special attack, all of a sudden you went from a support Pokemon. I just went from, I'm a support Pokemon, I'm going to just chip you down, weaken you, not really try to die, not going to lose a piece here, to all of a sudden, +1 Shadow Ball coming off a base 145 special attack stat is going to hurt, right? There's no denying that Shadow Ball already is going to hurt with minimal investment. Now, all of a sudden, you make that +1. It's doing damage, okay? And I think that's what people forget about this piece, right? It's like, oh, it's just a support bot now, and it's just going to sit there. But you can pivot this to a spot where once you've mitigated things, you can then start going Shadow Ball. Because this is a Pokemon that's going to sit on the field, right? Maybe you put it beside Rillaboom, you get mad recovery. It's just a really, you can build a bulky. Now, I know this is kind of sad and pathetic with the 60 base defense, okay? But you don't need more than this, right? I have 220 EVs right now. You can probably lower this if you wanted to, but I'm going to leave it at 200 for now, right? I have 220 EVs to play around with this bulk, right? Maybe I dump more into defense based on what I want to do, but I also have the Will-O-Wisp, right? So anything that's hitting me on the physical side, unless it's outpacing me, its damage is getting halved, right? And it's just a very phenomenal fast support Pokemon that I think people are forgetting exists. Because if the Dragonite, Shenpao stuff, and the Urshifu stuff, right, they're there to do damage. The moment you stop them from doing damage, they're not that scary anymore. And Spectre does a very good job of just outpacing most of those pieces. And obviously, if Shenpao starts running like Throat Chop, it gets a little annoying for this. But maybe you then tear it out of the Ghost type. Although I do like the Ghost type to stop the E-Speeds. It has been one of the big benefits, right? And maybe I can just ignore the Dragonite because I have my Spectre. They're going to lock into E-Speed. I kill 3 Pokemon. Then I have Spectre or Dragonite. They're locked into E-Speed. It's game over, right? I don't know. Fast support, really, really good. Long story short, y'all need to try this piece out. I think it's amazing. Being slept on still. I think there's been enough people, like both horses, I think are starting to see a little bit more usage. But I did still want to like make them known that they're still good, guys. Okay? They may not be like the powerhouse that is Urshifu or the absolute meta threat that is a Heatran or the Ursaluna, right? But they're still good pieces and they're super, super underexplored at the moment. Okay. So we're going to go Glimmora, and this is by far my niche, my most out there pick. I don't think it has much of a spot, but I can't help but feel there is maybe a slight spot somewhere in the meta, depending on how these Gudra teams keep moving. Excuse me, apparently you talk for 20 minutes and you can't speak anymore. You have 2 really good abilities. Toxic Debris is nice. But I do think Corrosion into the Gudra team specifically is really, really nice. Because you go Corrosion Toxic. Right? You go Corrosion Toxic. Maybe Corrosion Mortal Spin. Right? Just a lot of options to poison these things. You can now poison the Steel type. That is Gudra with Toxic. Right? And you poison the Gudra. It wants to sit there. It wants to get the Acid Armor up. It wants to get that Shelter. But wants the defense boosts. And then it wants to sit there and just kind of thing. But the moment I put it on a timer and take away any recovery that it can get is really, really nice. Now, obviously, this loses value into the Cresselia. As much as I'd want to say this is really good into Cresselia. Because before, Toxic and Cresselia was really, really good. Right? Like, it would just slowly tick down, slowly tick down. The only problem I have with Toxic now, which is why this is more of a... It really needs to be like a specific niche for Glimmora, is... Lunar Blessing is just going to heal the Toxic and heal the Cresselia, which is super, super unfortunate because, like, without that Lunar Blessing, right, you can start taking down. This would be a very strong way to kill Cresselia. Now, obviously, Mortal Spin is still nice. You're still forcing them to take a turn in Lunar Blessing. But teams without Cresselia, right, and some of, like, the bulkier stuff that's coming around, right? I saw a few Wochens earlier in the format. That's going to settle down, guys. It's not going to be a thing. It might be a thing. There might be a few Wochen teams, like really, really full-on stall. I don't think it's amazing. But there's options for it, right? And just the Gudra in specific is why I really wanted to mention this Glimmora. Just because poisoning it is a really strong strategy. And normally you can't poison it because right away it's a Steel type, right? But generally speaking, you just lead the thing you have Corrosion, you poison it. Straight up. You just click Toxic into it. Doesn't matter how many screens the Grimmsnarl that's beside the Gudra is going to set. It's going to get slowly chipped down by the Toxic, and it's only going to get worse and worse every turn for it, which I think makes it valid enough. Like, if you have a severe Gudra weakness, maybe this is a thing. Or if you have a severe stall weakness, this is a thing as well, right? Like, Hyper Offense struggles versus things you can't get KOs on. Right, so maybe this goes back onto a hyper offensive piece, right? Like, it was good with Dondozo, right? Like, Glimmora is always good. Its abilities are going to be decent depending on the meta. Right? And they're good abilities, right? And it was good on Dondozo in, like, the first 3 series because, like, you would poison things, they would get slowly chipped down, and they wouldn't be able to break through Dozo before they would die to the poison, right? Not a perfect science anymore because Lunar Blessing exists, which is a little bit unfortunate, right? However, Toxic Debris is still a thing. They can't always have Cresselia on the field, and not every team is going to have a Cresselia, so there are options for Glimmora to be good, right? Maybe you just use the poison to chip things down a little bit, right? That's all you kind of really need. Or forget about the special defense, right? What if this thing's just an offensive knockoff Nihilego, right? I got my Nihilego at home right here, right? Just max, maybe a Focus Sash, right? Right, I go Toxic Debris in this case, right? That way if the Urshifu hits me to get around the Sash, I'm putting up Toxic Debris twice, by the way. It does go up for each Surging Strikes hit, which I think is really, really cool. I could go Terra Grass, which is still the common move, right? I go Terra Grass, I go Energy Ball. All of a sudden, Urshifu needs to hit me, right? Just switch gears. All of a sudden, Urshifu needs to hit me now. Before it was, oh, I'm just going to outstall you, but now all of a sudden it needs to hit me. Sludge Bomb is still a really good damage-dealing move. Power Gem hits some of the fire types. Maybe you pair this thing with like a Fluttermane that doesn't really want to deal with those fire types, right? There's a lot of options for Glim. I don't think it's like, oh my goodness, this mon needs to be tried or needs to be tested. But I do think on specific teams versus specific matchups where maybe I just need to chip some things with some poison. Maybe I just need to do like a big anti-meta. Just scare them too, right? Like Glimmora makes you not want to bring your physical attackers, or at least at the very least make sure if you're bringing your physical attackers you have a way to deal with it quickly or save it for the end, right? So you can kind of force your hand from your opponent with Glimmora, and a lot of the times that's something that goes unnoticed, right? It's like, oh, Glimmora is really good, it hits this and this, but they don't realize that Glimmora also forces your opponent to play a certain way. Like if I have an Amoonguss on my team and I'm going up against the Glimmora, if I'm bringing my physical attackers, chances are I need to make sure my Amoonguss is in the back because I need to worry about this Toxic Debris, right? I need to worry about these spikes eventually taking out my team. Now, maybe I have a Cresselia and I just don't need to care about the spikes because I'll have Levitate if my partner gets poisoned, I'll Lunar Blessing. But not every team is going to have that, right? There are going to be teams, I think there are going to be matchups where you don't want to hit this Glimmora because they just have nothing for it. Right, I can Terra Grass out of most of my weaknesses as well, which is really, really nice. I have good damage dealing moves in Sludge Bomb and Power Gem and potentially Energy Ball if I wanted to take things like that. I also have Earth Power. Maybe I prank some Heatrans that don't want to Terra. Maybe I force the Heatran to Terra Grass and then I have a Sludge Bomb for it later, right? There's a lot of options with Glimmora. I don't think it's the best Pokemon, but it's there, guys. It's there. So, by the way, guys, just before we wrap this up, if you guys have any suggestions or any cool Pokemon you think need to be tried in the meta, feel free to leave a comment down below. I'm definitely interested in hearing your thoughts because I know I missed some. There is so many underexplored Pokemon that I really couldn't put them all in a video. So I know I missed some. Let me hear your thoughts. Hisuian Zoroark, maybe an honorable mention. Regidrago, maybe an honorable mention. But regardless of that, if you guys do enjoy this type of video, please feel free to leave a like and subscribe. It really does help out the channel. But with that, I'm going to stop rambling. Thank you so much for checking out the video, and I'll catch you all in a future video.